Nobody warned her about the silence. The kind that fills a room before someone loses everything. Nora arrived in Inchan expecting spreadsheets and schedules. Instead, she walked into a world where one wrong word ends careers, a fiancé weaponizes elegance, and the man at the center of it all hasn't smiled in years. But Nora didn't come to shrink. In a building full of people trained to disappear, she was the one who stayed visible. And that made her either the bravest woman in the room or the most targeted. The city of Inchan was about to find out which. If this kind of story is what you've been looking for, welcome to Naya Stories, home of African-Korean love stories. Subscribe right now, because this one does not slow down. Nora had been sitting in its waiting area for 11 minutes when director Inchan walked out of the back office carrying a folder and the specific expression of someone about to deliver news they personally found inconvenient. Your original placement has been withdrawn, Inchan said, sitting across from her without preamble. The accounting firm restructured overnight. Budget cuts. Nora kept her face still. She had been counting on that placement. 3 weeks of preparation, 2 rounds of interviews, one very carefully worded email to her mother in Lagos explaining that things were progressing. She did not let any of that show. And we have a replacement. It came in yesterday evening. Private executive assistant role. Inchan. The compensation. Inchan paused, and Nora understood the pause was intentional. Is significantly higher than what the accounting firm was offering. How significantly? Inchan told her. Nora sat with the number for exactly 3 seconds. It was 4 times the original offer. It was the kind of number that solved problems she had been carefully managing for 14 months. It was also the kind of number that almost never arrived without something complicated attached to it. What's the role? She asked. Personal executive assistant to the director of a private holdings company. Scheduling, correspondence, managing communications between departments and external partners. Your language profile is specifically why you were flagged. Korean, English, and French. That combination is rare. The director's name. Inchan opened the folder. Cha Yun-hoo. The name produced nothing in Nora. No recognition, no alarm. She had spent 14 months in Seoul, keeping her world deliberately small. She didn't follow local power structures or business hierarchies. She followed her schedule, her savings account, and the slow, careful construction of a life she was building from scratch in a country that hadn't been designed with her in mind. You paused before saying his name, Nora said. He is a demanding employer. The role has had significant turnover. How significant? 4 assistants in 18 months. Inchan said it like a fact, not an apology. The candidates who left were not inadequate. The environment requires a specific temperament. I want to be transparent with you. You think it suits mine. I think you are the most composed candidate I have placed in 3 years. I also think you need this contract more than you're currently letting me see. She said it without cruelty. Pure accuracy. 3 months initially. Renewable. If it works, it works. The compensation buys you time either way. Nora thought about the rent increase notice on her kitchen counter. She thought about the calls from home she'd been answering with careful optimism for over a year. She thought about the accounting firm and 2 rounds of interviews and the particular exhaustion of having something certain dissolve overnight into nothing. Send me the address, she said. The building near Inchan's port was not what she had imagined. She had prepared herself for glass and steel and a corporate lobby. Instead, the car dropped her in front of a converted industrial complex that had been renovated at extraordinary cost. Clean stone facade, reinforced windows, a security gate staffed by 2 men who said nothing and checked everything. The kind of building that didn't advertise itself. The kind that didn't need to. A young woman named Moran met her at the entrance with fast eyes and a quick bow, and led her through corridors that smelled like cold air and efficiency. You'll receive a briefing before you meet Mr. Cha, Moran said, already walking at a pace that suggested standing still was mildly dangerous here. Standard practice? Nora asked. Yes. Speak clearly. Answer directly. Don't fill silence. Don't fill silence. He asks a question, you answer it. You don't elaborate unless he asks. You don't offer opinions unless he asks. And if he goes quiet, Miran paused at a door and held it open. Let him. The briefing was conducted by Dojin, a man in his 30s built like someone who spent time outdoors doing things that required it, and an older woman from internal administration who did not offer her name. They ran through protocols with the brisk efficiency of people who had done this before. Nora took 3 pages of notes and asked 4 questions. All 4 were answered with visible relief, as though they had prepared for 20. When Dojin walked her to the upper floor, he said, "The last assistant asked no questions at the briefing." "How did that work out?" Nora said. 11 days. The upper floor operated under a specific kind of quiet, not peaceful, but disciplined. The kind that comes not from comfort, but from awareness. 3 staff members worked at desks along a windowed wall, and every one of them looked up when Nora entered and looked away just as quickly, the way people do when they've learned that attention has a cost. Dojin knocked twice on a closed door. "Come in." She had prepared herself for the voice to be loud. It wasn't. It was low and completely certain, the kind of certainty that doesn't require volume, because volume is for people who aren't sure they'll be heard. Yunhu was standing when she entered, which surprised her. He was 30 years old, tall, dressed in a dark suit without a tie, reading something in his hand with the concentrated attention of a man who finished things before moving to the next. He didn't look up immediately, not as a performance of indifference, but because he was genuinely finishing the thought. Then he set the paper down and looked at her. His face did not give information easily. Not cold, contained. His eyes moved across her the way someone reads a document. Assessing. Precise. Not unkind. "Nora," he said. "Yes." "Sit down." He sat across from her and read her resume in silence for 30 seconds while she sat without fidgeting. She had learned a long time ago that stillness under observation was its own form of communication. "You speak French," he said. "Yes. My mother taught me. I grew up between Lagos and Abidjan. The shipping contacts in Côte d'Ivoire communicate almost exclusively in French. My previous assistant required a translator for every exchange. That added 2 days to every correspondence cycle. I can handle correspondence directly," Nora said. "Written and verbal. You've never worked in this kind of environment." "No. But I learn operational systems quickly, and I don't require repetition." He studied her then, not the resume, her. "Why did you take this placement?" She gave him a real answer because the question deserved one. "The compensation is 4 times my previous offer. I have financial obligations. And I don't frighten easily." Something in his expression shifted, barely a degree, quickly controlled. "Most people who say that haven't been tested yet." "Most people who say it haven't," she agreed. "I have." He held her gaze for a moment that lasted just past comfortable. Then he stood. "You start now. There are 14 correspondence items requiring responses before 3 o'clock." He moved back, toward the window. "One more thing. You will encounter people in and around this building who will test you in ways that have nothing to do with your job. I will tell you once. I don't retain people who destabilize under social pressure. Not because I lack understanding of pressure. Because I need people who are more useful than they are fragile." Nora stood. "Then we should get along fine," she said, and left. She had the 14 items completed by 1:40 in the afternoon. 3 required French. 2 required her to cross-reference port schedules against a calendar that the previous assistant had maintained with the organizational logic of someone drowning. She rebuilt the relevant sections without being asked. When Dojin brought everything to Yunhu's desk, she heard nothing back. She took that as approval. At 4:30, the floor changed. She heard the heels first. A specific kind, chosen for sound as much as height. Each step announcing arrival the way a knock announces itself before the door opens. Staff at the windowed desks adjusted without moving. Postures shifted. Eyes went down. The temperature in the room didn't change, but the atmosphere did, the way it does before weather. Sioran walked in like she owned the building and was currently deciding whether to redecorate. She was beautiful the way expensive things are beautiful, precise, maintained, deliberate. She wore ivory like armor. Her hair was immaculate, her jewelry restrained to the point of arrogance. She was 28 and she moved through the space with the ease of someone who had decided long ago that ease was her right. She noticed Nora immediately. Not the way people notice something new. The way they notice something they haven't decided what to do with yet. "You're the new assistant," she said. Nora stood from her desk. "Yes, Nora." Sioran looked at her for a moment, designed to be felt. "Korean?" "No. Nigerian." She said it the way people receive information that interests them less than the power to receive it. She moved past Nora toward Yunhu's office without knocking and closed the door behind her. Miran appeared at Nora's elbow. That's Sioran. I gathered. His fiancée. I gathered that too. Miran stopped. Rearranged the folders in her hands. Just be careful. Nora looked at the closed door and filed the silence away like a document she'd need later. The first full week passed in a density that surprised her. Yunhu operated at a pace that left no room for decorative effort. Every task had a purpose. Every communication had a consequence. And the calendar she inherited was maintained with the logic of someone who had been drowning in deep water for months. She rebuilt it in 2 days. She created a correspondence tracking system that halved response times. She learned which calls he took himself and which he wanted filtered, and she learned it by observing, not asking, because she understood quickly that he appreciated efficiency more than engagement. He was not warm, but he was fair in the way people are fair when they respect competence and have no patience for anything else. He didn't thank her for the rebuilt calendar. On the morning she completed it, he arrived, reviewed it for 7 minutes, and immediately began using it. That was his thank you. She accepted it as such. Sioran visited 4 times that week. Each visit followed the same pattern, no announcement, straight to Yunhu's office, between 20 minutes and an hour, departure having left some small adjustment in the atmosphere. A comment here, a look there. On the 3rd visit, she said something at Miran's desk too low for Nora to hear that made Miran's neck tighten visibly. On the 4th, she stopped in front of Nora on her way out. The flowers in the 3rd floor conference room are wrong, she said. White chrysanthemums in a business setting. Change them. Nora looked up from her work. Flower arrangements are managed by the building's hospitality coordinator. I'll make sure she receives the preference today. I'm not asking you to pass it along. I'm asking you to handle it. The coordinator handles it, Nora said. She'll have your instruction by end of day. A pause. Waited. You're very literal. I find it saves time, Nora said, and returned to her screen. She felt Sioran's gaze on the side of her face for a moment. Then the heels clicked away, and behind her, she was almost certain she heard Miran release a breath she'd been holding. The breaking point came on a Thursday in the 2nd week, and it came the way Sioran did everything, with precision and an audience. The meeting was a review of logistics contracts. Yunhu at the head of the table, Dojin to his left, 3 senior staff, 2 external partners, and Sioran representing her family's business interests. Nora's role was documentation and room management. 40 minutes in, a junior staff member named Jahun knocked over his water glass while reaching for a document. Water spread across the corner of the table. Jahun went white and began apologizing with the desperate energy of someone who understood that small mistakes carried large consequences in this building. Sioran watched him for 3 seconds. Clean it up, she said quietly. Jahun was already reaching for napkins. He had it. But Sioran was not looking at Jahun. She was looking at Nora. I meant her. The table went still. Not loudly. The kind of still that happens when everyone processes something at exactly the same moment. Nora set down her pen. She looked at Sioran across the table and understood precisely what was happening. This was not about water. The water was incidental. This was a demonstration of hierarchy, of reach, of who bends and who doesn't in this room. And it was being staged in front of an audience because the audience was the point. Yunhu, who had been reviewing a document to his left, had gone still in a way that was different from the stillness of the room. Jahun has it, Nora said. Her voice was level the way level voices are when they've already decided something and are no longer negotiating. He doesn't need help. Sioran's chin lifted slightly. I wasn't asking about Jahun. I'm aware of that. Then you understand what I'm asking. I understand what you're asking, Nora said. And I'm not going to do it. Nobody moved. The air had the quality of held breath. Sioran smiled slowly. The kind of smile that means something has just become more interesting in a dangerous way. You're an assistant. Acting above your position doesn't make you look strong. It makes you look confused about what you are. I know exactly what I am, Nora said. I'm an executive assistant. Not a cleaner, not a servant. Not a prop for someone else's demonstration. Jahun is handling the spill. The meeting should continue. The silence lasted 5 full seconds. Then Yunhu said, without inflection, continue. He said it to the room. He picked up his document. The meeting continued. Sioran's smile stayed in place for 1 moment longer, not warmth, but filing, and then she turned back to the table. Nora picked up her pen. Her hand was steady. Her pulse was not. But she had learned years ago that the two didn't need to match. After the meeting, nobody said anything directly to her. The afternoon moved the way afternoons move. Tasks, calls, the ordinary machinery of the day. At 6, most of the floor cleared. Miran stopped at Nora's desk. "People have been fired for less than that," she said. "I know. How are you not scared?" "I am scared," Nora said simply. "I'm just not going to let it be the most important thing about me." Miran stared at her, then nodded slowly like she was making a decision, and left. At 6:45, Yunhu came out of his office with his jacket over his arm and stopped when he saw her still working. "You're still here. Meeting documentation. I wanted it ready for your morning review." He looked at her. "Sioran will not forget what happened in that room. I know. She has influence here beyond what her official relationship to this office suggests. I understand. You knew that before you refused." "Yes. Why refuse anyway?" She gave him the real answer. "Because the moment I kneel for something that isn't worth kneeling for, I've told everyone in that room how to treat me for as long as I'm here. I can't afford that." He stood with his jacket over his arm and looked at her the way people look at things they are deciding whether to trust. Then he said, "You were right about Jehun. He had it handled," and left. She sat alone on the empty floor and allowed herself 30 seconds to feel the full weight of what she had walked into. Then she picked up her pen and finished the documentation. Weeks compounded into a month and the month into 2. And in that time, Nora built something inside Yunhu's operation that hadn't been there before. Not loyalty exactly, because loyalty was too soft a word for what that environment asked of people, but presence. The kind that a system begins to organize itself around without anyone deciding to. She arrived 10 minutes before anyone else. Not performance. She needed those minutes because Yunhu's schedule began generating active demands from 7:45 onward, and 10 minutes of preparation was the difference between managing the day and chasing it. She reviewed overnight messages, flagged everything requiring his attention before 9, had his coffee on the desk before he arrived. Not because it was expected, because she had noticed in the second week that on mornings it was there, his first 20 minutes ran measurably faster. Small efficiencies compounded into large ones over time. Dojin noticed. "You run this floor differently than the others did," he said during a coordination call in the 3rd week. "Differently how?" "Like you understand it instead of surviving it." "Is there a difference?" He looked at her with the expression of someone who had worked somewhere long enough to stop thinking about why. "Here?" "Yes." The other workers began adjusting around her presence in small ways. They came to her first when something needed to reach Yunhu, because they had learned she would carry it accurately and without embellishment. Miran had become something adjacent to friendship. Careful, genuine, expressed in small containers of lunch left without explanation, which Nora understood was Miran's way of saying she was glad Nora was still there. Yunhu himself changed the way demanding people change when someone meets their standard, not by softening, but by extending. He began including her in briefings she hadn't been included in before. Not all briefings. The ones where context mattered. The first time he said mid-explanation, "You need to know this," because she understood something had shifted. He was no longer assuming she might leave. He was building her into the architecture. She was careful with that. She didn't lean into it or read more than was there. But she filed it. Sioran continued visiting. Each visit left its residue. A comment aimed at someone too junior to respond. A look that cataloged everything it landed on. A directness toward Nora that had moved from dismissal into something more specific and therefore more deliberate. Nora had begun to understand her not as a personality, but as a strategy. The cruelty wasn't incidental to Sioran. It was operational. Every small humiliation she administered was a measurement. She was testing what this environment would allow, which people could be pressured, and what Yunhu would and would not see. What Nora had not yet fully understood was that Sioran was also measuring something much larger than the floor. She found the numbers by accident. Port logistics files she accessed for correspondence purposes, a subset of financial records she wasn't looking for, and would have missed if she hadn't become fluent over 2 months in the specific rhythm of how money moved through this operation. The transfers didn't read as wrong exactly. They read as careful. And careful in financial documents meant competence or concealment. And the two looked identical until you understood which one had a reason to hide. She documented what she saw in her private notes. cross-referenced the dates against the incoming meeting calendar, and said nothing. It was not her job to investigate. But the pattern accumulated in a way that wouldn't stop producing unease. Amounts moving through port subsidiaries in increments small enough to avoid triggering internal review thresholds. Timing that correlated with specific meetings she had scheduled between Yunhu and external partners. And the consistent directionality of the movement. Always out, never in, always toward accounts she couldn't trace through the documentation she had access to. She sat on this for 2 weeks. Not from indecision, but because she understood that walking into Yunhu's office with a suspicion and no architecture of proof was worse than silence. She continued working. She continued watching. Then on a Wednesday morning in the 6th week, Sioran arrived wearing red and carrying a document folder, which was unusual. She normally arrived with nothing except herself. She was inside Yunhu's office for 45 minutes and came out smiling. Not her controlled social smile, but something that had information in it, something satisfied. She passed Nora's desk without acknowledging her and left. 2 hours later, Dojin came to Nora's desk with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Tight around the eyes. Something between anger and conflict. "There's been an allegation," he said quietly. "What kind?" "Confidential documents from the Côte d'Ivoire shipping file have appeared in a competitor's possession. Someone in this office is being identified as the source." He paused. "The identification points to you." The office around them continued its ordinary sounds. Nora let the information settle rather than reacting to it. "What evidence?" "A record of file access on your terminal. 11:48 p.m. last Tuesday. You were the only assistant logged in at that hour." "I left the building at 8:53 that evening," Nora said. Her voice was level. Not urgent. Not pleading. "The building security log will confirm it. The access log shows 11:48. Then the log was generated by someone who was not me. I want to see both logs side by side." Dojin looked at her carefully. "Most people in this situation come in offering explanations." "I'm offering something better than explanations," she said. "I'm offering to show you the problem." It took 40 minutes. She requested access to the building's security system through the internal administrator, through the correct channel, because the chain of request was itself a form of argument here. She pulled entry and exit timestamps, cross-referenced them against the terminal access log, and laid both documents on the conference room table in front of Dojin and the administrator. "I exited at 8:53. Building log confirms it." She pointed. The terminal access at 11:48 was 36 minutes after the last security sweep that found the building at capacity for overnight staff. 6 people were present at that hour. She laid the personnel list on the table. "One of them used my login credentials." The administrator looked at the documents. Dojin looked at them. "The login was forced?" the administrator asked. "The login used my password, which means it was obtained, or the access event was manufactured. Either way, it wasn't me at that terminal." Dojin looked at her with something she hadn't seen from him before. Not quite revision, but recalculation. Like a figure he'd been working with had just been corrected. "I'll take this to Mr. Cha," he said. "I'd like to be present," Nora said. "Why?" "The accusation was made about me in a room I wasn't in. I'd like the correction to happen in a room I am in." He nodded once. 20 minutes. She went back to her desk and worked, because working was the most accurate expression of her position she could offer. She was not guilty. She had the evidence. She would wait. Yunhu was standing when she entered his office, which she had come to understand was what he did when he was actively processing rather than receiving. Dojin closed the door. "Walk me through it," Yunhu said. She walked him through it. Exit timestamp. Terminal log. The intersection that was impossible. The 6 personnel present. The copy she placed on his desk without being asked. When she finished, she stood back and said nothing else, because nothing else was needed. He studied the documents for a long time. Then he looked at her. "You didn't come in here asking me to believe you," he said. "Belief is for things that can't be verified," she said. "This can be verified." Something moved in his expression, deep and controlled and quickly gone, living in the same territory as a smile, without completing the journey. He looked back at the documents. "You know where this points," he said. "I have a direction," she said carefully. "Establishing the origin is not my job." "No," he said. "It isn't." He was quiet. And in that quiet she could feel him moving pieces across a board she couldn't fully see. "The accusation has been withdrawn." Officially, by end of day. She nodded and turned to leave. Nora. She stopped. The Abidjan correspondence. The third letter to Monsieur Cohn. He paused. The tone was exactly right. He responded this morning without conditions for the first time in 9 months. She held the moment, nodded, and left. In the hallway she allowed herself one full breath. The false accusation changed something in the architecture of the office. Not dramatically, not loudly, but perceptibly. The staff who had watched from a careful distance began to watch her differently. Not with warmth exactly, but with the particular consideration people extend towards someone who has been tested in public and remains standing. Even Dojin, whose professional investment in her had always been pragmatic, adjusted in ways too small to name, but too consistent to miss. Yunhu said nothing about the accusation again. But 3 days later he called her into a briefing with 2 of his senior logistics managers and did not explain why she was there until midway through, when he said to the room, Nora manages all French correspondence from this office. If Monsieur Cohn's team contacts anyone in this building, it goes through her. He said it with the same flatness he applied to everything else. She wrote it down like a task note and said nothing, because that was the right response to something being given without ceremony. It was in the 7th week that she told him about the numbers. She had been carrying the information for 2 weeks, and she had finally built enough of an architecture around it to bring it to him with something more than instinct. She had cross-referenced the transfer dates against 4 months of the logistics calendar, identified the accounts consistently receiving funds, and isolated a pattern that connected 3 of Sioran's family's subsidiary companies to outgoing payments from a port operations account that Yunhu controlled but clearly hadn't been monitoring at the transaction level. She waited until 7:30 in the evening when the floor was empty. She walked into his office with a single printed document, a timeline, clean and annotated, and set it on his desk. He looked at it. He looked at her. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He read the document the way he read everything, completely, without interruption. When he finished, he was quiet for a long time. "How long have you known this?" he said. "I've suspected for 2 weeks. I needed enough structure to bring it to you as information rather than a feeling. Why didn't you bring it immediately?" "Because a feeling in this office without proof is more dangerous than silence," she said. "You know that better than I do." He looked at the document again. Something in his jaw had changed, a tightening that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with the particular quality of pain that comes from confirming something you had been hoping was wrong. "This is Sioran. The accounts connect to her family's subsidiaries. Whether she's directing it or someone in her family's operation is using her position here. I can't determine that from what I have access to. I can." He said it quietly. He set the document down and looked at the port lights through the glass wall. The silence that followed was not the comfortable kind. It was the silence of a man revising something fundamental. "She was here 3 weeks ago with documentation I signed without reviewing it thoroughly enough. I trusted the context. The transfers started 4 months ago," Nora said. "Before I was here." He looked at her. She didn't know why she had said that. Perhaps because she understood he might be asking himself why his own assistant had found this when he hadn't, and she wanted him to know the timeline didn't indict his judgment so much as demonstrate how carefully it had been constructed around him. "She's been weakening the port accounts before the marriage," he said. It wasn't a question. He was thinking aloud, which she understood was something he didn't often do with another person in the room. "It looks that way," Nora said. "A marriage that consolidates 2 operations is significantly more valuable to her family if your operation arrives at the consolidation already depleted." He was quiet for a long time. The port lights moved slowly in the distance. "You understand what you've done by bringing this to me?" "Yes. If Sioran finds out you found this." "I know. You're not afraid of that." She looked at him. "I'm afraid of a great many things. I'm sitting here anyway." He looked back at her with an expression she had not seen from him before, open in a way that his face almost never permitted itself to be, something present in it that he seemed to realize he wasn't hiding and chose not to correct. "Why?" he said. And he meant not why she was sitting there, but why her. Why this woman who had walked in through an employment agency 6 weeks ago had chosen, at every available opportunity, to stay rather than exit. She thought about answering honestly and decided the honesty was already in the room. "Because you've been fair to me," she said. "And because fair is rarer than people say it is." He held her gaze. Then he nodded once, the way he nodded when he had received something and confirmed it and didn't need to say more, and looked back at the document. I'll handle this, he said. Don't discuss it with anyone. Understood. And Nora? She was at the door. Leave before 8 tonight. You've been here since 7 this morning. She almost smiled. I'll leave at 8, she said. I have 3 items to finish. He made a sound that was not quite exasperation and not quite amusement. She left. What happened next did not happen quietly. Yunhoo investigated without alerting anyone. Nora understood this because his schedule in the days following their conversation contained a series of private calls she had been asked to log without details, and several early morning arrivals that predated even her own. He moved with the particular efficiency of someone operating inside a time constraint he hadn't disclosed. She did not ask. She managed the visible machinery of his days and said nothing and trusted that when the time came she would know what she needed to know. The engagement ceremony was scheduled for a Saturday. A formal event at a private venue. Powerful families, a structured announcement, the public architecture of an alliance. Nora spent 3 days coordinating the logistical components she was responsible for, Yunhoo's schedule, communications with the event coordinator, transportation for several visiting business contacts. She did it with the same careful efficiency she applied to everything, even knowing what she knew, even understanding that what she had handed Yunhoo 2 weeks ago was a timer rather than a document. On the morning of the ceremony, Dojin stopped at her desk. He looked at her for a moment without saying anything, which with Dojin meant something. He's going to move today, Dojin said. I know, she said. It will create problems. For the business. For the family relationships. He paused. For everyone near him. I know that too. Dojin looked at her for one more moment. Then he nodded and walked away. She was not at the ceremony. Her role didn't require her presence, and she hadn't been invited, which suited her. She sat at her desk in the empty building near Inchan's port and worked through the afternoon with the particular focus of someone who understands that whatever is happening elsewhere is happening, and her job is to be ready for whatever comes back. What came back came fast. Miran called her at 4:17. Her voice was not calm. He stopped it, she said, right in front of everyone. He had a presentation, documents on a screen, everything Sioran had been moving through the accounts. Her family's subsidiaries, the transfer records, all of it. In front of both families. Nora was quiet. She didn't deny it, Miran continued. She tried to reframe it, called it an advanced consolidation, said it was standard practice for family mergers. He dismantled every argument before she finished making it. And then Miran's voice dropped. He terminated the engagement. Formally. In front of everyone. How did her family respond? Badly. Her father left without speaking. Her brother, the one they call Haejin, he stayed. He was very still. That kind of still that's worse than loud. Nora understood. The alliance is broken. Publicly. In front of every major contact both families maintain in Inchan. Miran paused. People are already saying you had something to do with this. What people? Sioran's people. They're saying the new assistant. They don't know your name yet. But they will. After the call ended, Nora sat with the information for 1 minute exactly. Then she pulled up the security protocols for the building, reviewed the overnight staffing list, and sent Dojin a message asking him to confirm that the perimeter team had been briefed on the change in circumstances. She did not panic. She prepared. Dojin's response came in 4 minutes. Confirmed. Then, come in early tomorrow. Mr. Cha wants a briefing at 7. She was there at 6:50. Yunhoo looked like a man who had not slept, but had decided sleep was not the priority right now. He was at his desk when she arrived, suit jacket off, a coffee he hadn't touched going cold beside him. He looked up when she walked in, and something in the lines of his face shifted slightly. Not relaxation exactly, but the specific adjustment that happens when a person in a difficult situation sees something they find reliable. Sit down, he said. She sat. The ceremony created 3 categories of immediate problem, he said, and walked her through all 3 with the direct efficiency she had come to understand was his version of trust. He didn't simplify for her, didn't soften the operational reality, didn't treat her like someone who needed protecting from information. Sioran's family had moved to freeze 2 joint port agreements pending legal review. Haejin, Sioran's brother, had made contact with 2 of Yunhoo's rival operations within hours of the ceremony ending. And internally, One of Yunhu's senior contacts had gone unreachable since the previous evening. Not unreachable in the way of someone overwhelmed, but unreachable in the deliberate way of someone who had made a decision. The internal contact, Nora said. Who is it? He told her. She had interacted with this person. She had, in fact, always found something slightly performative about his loyalty. The kind of loyalty that displayed itself a fraction too consistently, the way things do when they are being maintained rather than felt. He's been in contact with Haejin's operation, Yunhu said. We're confirming it now. If that confirmation holds, then the leak that was attributed to you was almost certainly him. He had access to the shipping files. He knew your schedule and your login from the onboarding documentation, and he had sufficient motivation. The framing of me was preparatory, Nora said, understanding it as she said it. If the alliance broke down, having a credible accusation ready to point at an outsider, someone who hadn't been here long, deflects attention from the actual point of compromise. Yes. Yunhu looked at her. I owe you a direct acknowledgement of that. You cleared it, Nora said. I should have cleared it faster. She nodded once. What do you need from me today? He almost smiled. Almost. I need you to draft a communication to Monsieur Kone's team in Abidjan explaining that the port agreements under review are not connected to the Côte d'Ivoire contracts and that business continuity is unaffected. In French, it needs to sound like certainty, not reassurance. Those are different things, she said. That's why I'm asking you specifically. She wrote the letter in 40 minutes. He reviewed it in 8 and sent it without changes. The days that followed were dense in the way that aftermath is always dense, not dramatic in a visible way, but layered with the ongoing work of managing consequences that had their own momentum. The internal contact was confirmed as the source of the account leak and removed from the building with the particular quiet efficiency that Yunhu applied to things he wanted handled without spectacle. The legal review of the port agreements resolved faster than expected when the documentation Nora had compiled 2 weeks earlier was shared with the relevant parties through appropriate legal channels, demonstrating that the freeze had been filed on the basis of account activity that was itself the product of unauthorized transfers. Haejin remained a concern. He had made 3 attempts through intermediaries to reach contacts within Yunhu's operation, each attempt more lateral than the last, not aggressive, but persistent in the way of someone who is not giving up and wants that understood. Dojin briefed Nora on each attempt because Yunhu had asked that she be included in all security-relevant information, which told her, without being told, that her position here had become something different from what she had arrived for. She was thinking about that on a Tuesday evening when the building security alert sounded. Not loudly. A quiet, specific tone that she had been briefed on in the first week and had hoped never to hear in practice. She was at her desk. The floor was half-staffed. She was already reaching for the security protocol document when Dojin came through the stairwell, door moving fast. Stay inside, he said. What is it? Vehicle in the lower lot, that doesn't belong. 2 individuals on foot approaching the east entrance. He was already on his phone. Building lockdown in 60 seconds. Don't move from this floor. Nora. Yunhu was at his office door. She hadn't heard him come out. His voice was level, but she could see in the set of his shoulders something that she had not seen from him before. Not fear, because she was not sure fear was a thing he permitted himself, but urgency in its purest form. Come here. She crossed the floor to him. He put one hand on her shoulder, briefly, firmly, the way you steady something you don't want to fall, and looked at her with an expression she had no framework for because she had never seen it on his face. You saw the vehicle before the alert, he said. She blinked. What? You sent Dojin a message 12 minutes ago asking him to check the lower lot. He was already moving when the alert triggered. She had noticed the vehicle when she went to the window to check the harbor light conditions for a document she was formatting. Something about the angle of its parking. The way it was positioned with the nose out, facing the exit. The way people park when they intend to leave quickly. She had logged it as an anomaly and sent Dojin a note without fully understanding why she was doing it, until she was already done. I noticed it was parked incorrectly, she said. Yunhu looked at her for a long moment. You noticed, he said, in a tone that contained considerably more than those 2 words. Get into my office. The lockdown lasted 22 minutes. The 2 individuals at the east entrance were intercepted. They were not armed, but they were carrying documentation that confirmed Haejin's involvement and provided Yunhu's security team with enough to take to the appropriate authorities. The vehicle in the lot was registered to a shell company that traced back to the same network Dojin had been tracking for 6 days. When the lockdown ended and the floor returned to something resembling its normal state, Nora went back to her desk. Her hands were steady. Her heart was not. She sat for one moment and looked at the harbor lights and permitted herself to feel, completely, the reality of what her life had become in the past 2 months. Then she opened the document she had been formatting and finished the section she had been working on. Yunhu appeared at the edge of her desk 20 minutes later. He stood there for a moment without speaking, which was unusual for him even in the context of his general economy with words. "Say what you need to say," Nora said, without looking up from the document. "You could have been in serious danger tonight," he said. "I know. If you hadn't sent that message to Dojin. But I did." He was quiet. She looked up. His expression was the open one, the one she had seen in the lamplight weeks ago when she had brought him the financial documents, the one that lived past the contained surface of his face and was therefore real in a way that the contained surface wasn't. "Nora," he said. "Yes." He stopped. In the 2 months she had known him, she had never heard him stop in the middle of a sentence. He always knew what he was going to say before he began saying it. This was different. This was a man arriving at something he hadn't prepared language for. She waited. "I am not accustomed to people choosing to remain in difficult circumstances because they trust me," he said finally. "People remain because they are paid, or because they are afraid, or because they have no other option. What you have done, what you have continued to do, is not that." "No," she said. "It isn't. I don't know what to do with that." He said it with a frankness so uncharacteristic that it took her a moment to recognize it as frankness. She looked at him. "You don't have to do anything with it," she said. "It's just true." He was quiet for a long time. Then he sat down, not at her desk, but in the chair beside it, the one usually occupied by whoever he was directing to carry out a task, and he sat in it the way a man sits when he has stopped carrying something. "Tell me something," he said. "What? Why does everything I say to you sound like the first time I've said it to another person?" The question landed in her chest with a weight she hadn't prepared for. She looked at the harbor lights because looking at his face right then would have required more composure than she had available. "Because you mean it," she said. "People can tell." He said nothing. The silence was the kind she had learned to read as full rather than empty. Full of something being held, something turning over, something deciding whether it was safe to become what it was already becoming. "I am going to have to dismantle the remaining elements of the Hagen operation," he said eventually, returning to the operational register. "It will take approximately 3 weeks. It will not be straightforward. Several of the business contacts involved will be unhappy in ways that may create further pressure on this office." "I know," she said. "You don't have to be part of that. I'm already part of it. You could choose not to be." He looked at her. "I want to make that clear. The agency contract technically ends next week. You could walk out of this with 3 months of significant compensation and a clean record and no further obligation." "Are you trying to give me an exit?" she said. "I'm trying to make sure you know one exists." She looked at him. "Why?" "Because," he stopped again. That unfamiliar stopping. "Because you came here for a desk job and a paycheck, and instead you got this. All of this. And I want to know that if you're still here, it's because you chose it." She thought about the employment agency, the recycled air and the manila envelope and the rent increase notice on her kitchen counter, and the number Inchan had told her that morning that seemed so transactional and was now something entirely different in context. She thought about every moment since then, the 14 correspondence items, the meeting where she didn't kneel, the financial documents she could have simply not noticed, the vehicle parked nose out in the lower lot that she had sent a message about without fully knowing why. She thought about who she had been when she arrived and understood that the shape of herself that had been formed in this building was truer than the shape she had arrived with. Not because the building had changed her, but because it had required, consistently and without mercy, that she be entirely herself. "I'm still here," she said, "because this is where I choose to be." He looked at her. The open expression. No surface. No containment. Just him, looking at her. "Then stay," he said. It was not romantic in the way that declarations are romantic. It didn't have flowers or a soundtrack or the perfect lighting of constructed moments. It had harbor lights and a building that had recently been in lockdown and two people sitting in the quiet aftermath of a very difficult 2 months, one of them having just offered the truest version of themselves and the other having just received it without flinching. That was enough. That was, Nora thought, considerably more than enough. What followed the Haejin situation's resolution was quieter than everything before it, which surprised her. She had expected the dismantling of a network to be loud, to generate visible turbulence, to send aftershocks through the floor of the building in ways that would require managing. Instead, it was surgical. Yunhu operated with the contained precision of someone who had been building toward this moment long enough to have every component ready before the mechanism was triggered. Within 3 weeks, the legal documentation was filed, the compromised business contacts were redirected through appropriate channels, and the shell company network that had been funneling funds out of the port accounts had been exposed and frozen. Sioran did not make contact. Whether this was dignity or strategy or the particular silence of someone who had overplayed their position and was now recalibrating, Nora couldn't determine. She filed it as information she didn't need right now. What she needed right now, she understood, was to decide, not in the abstract way she had decided in that conversation with Yunhu beside her desk, but in the specific practical way of actually committing to what her life had become. She called Inchan at the agency on a Thursday morning. "I'm extending the contract," she said. A pause. "He's renewing it." "I'm renewing it," Nora said. A longer pause. Then Inchan said, with something in her voice that sounded like genuine relief, "I'll have the paperwork to you by end of day." She ended the call and looked at her desk. The calendar she had rebuilt in the second week, the correspondence tracking system, the harbor view through the glass wall that she had stopped consciously noticing because it had become simply the view from where she worked, and felt the particular steadiness of someone who has stopped being uncertain about where they are. Yunhu appeared in the doorway of his office at 9:45, which was early for him to be moving around the floor. He looked at her. "Inchan called to confirm the renewal," he said. "I know. You told her you were renewing it." "I did." He stood in the doorway with one hand on the frame, and he looked at her with the expression she had first seen in the 7th week and had since come to understand was the one that was real. Not cold, not contained, not strategic. Just him. "You could have let me initiate it," he said. "I know," she said. "I preferred to do it myself." Something moved across his face, that controlled, almost smile, closer to the surface now than it had ever been. "Of course you did," he said, and went back into his office. Dojin appeared at her elbow 20 minutes later carrying 2 coffees, which he set on her desk without explanation. He looked at her for a moment. "Welcome back," he said. "I never left," she said. "No," he said, with something in his expression that might have been satisfaction. "You didn't," and walked back to his own work, and the floor moved around her in its ordinary rhythm, and outside the harbor lights were already shifting toward afternoon, and Nora sat at her desk in Inchan and worked, and stayed, and chose it, and that was how the story began in earnest. If you made it to the end of this story, you already know this is not like the others. Subscribe right now and hit the notification bell, because Nora and Yunhu's world is only getting deeper, and you do not want to miss what comes next. Like this video if you stayed until the last line, and drop a comment telling us, which moment hit you hardest? The meeting room refusal? The harbor conversation? The moment she renewed the contract herself? We read every single comment. See you in the next one.